Now that we've discussed the basic idea of arrays, as well as kind of given a preview of the notation involved, let's go ahead and move to BlueJ and try to do some actual coding. In the book, there's a kind of an already given example called BasicArray of how to use arrays. But what I'm actually going to do in this video is code it from scratch. So I'm going to do it here, and it's going to be maybe a little bit different than the book, but we're going to cover the exact same things. The reason I'm doing it that way is so that I can actually explain the lines as I write them. So let's go ahead and get started. So the goal of my program here is that I want to create an array, and in that array I'm going to store a bunch of numbers that are multiples of each other, and then at the end I'm going to end up printing them out. So if I maybe jump up here, let me actually put in a little comment to show you guys what the output I'm looking for is going to be like. So at the end of the day, what I want is something like this. Let's go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on. And maybe I would say, let's even say the first one is starting at 0. So I want to print out a bunch of numbers, and they're all going to be kind of multiples of 10. So that's what I want to do. I want to create an array that'll store each of these values, right? Each of these things. And then once I'm done setting up that array, then I can go through and I can print out everything inside there. So really I got three things I need to do. I need to set up an array, I need to populate it with data, and I need to print it out. So these are the three things I'm going to look at doing. So let's go and look at setting it up. So first thing I need to do is I need to create a new array variable. Well, over here I'm going to use kind of syntax that is at the same time familiar and different with respect to the variables that we've created before. So over here you can see there's all integers, right? So I know I'm going to have something that looks like an int, right? So I'm going to go in here and type in the word int. So this is what I would do, right, if I was creating a variable that was just going to store a single integer. But here, right, that's not what I want to do. Well, here what I want to do is actually create an array, right? I want to create a bunch of things. So what I'm going to type in is this. Open bracket, close bracket. So the way you would read this is that this isn't just an integer. This is an array of integers. So this functions as extra type information, right? It's not just a number. It's an array of numbers, right? So it's giving me a little bit more information about what this variable is going to be. And then from here, I'll be able to declare its name. Let me just call this list. Okay, so at this point I've created a new variable called list, which is going to be an array of integers. Right now, though, I've just created that variable. I haven't actually built an array. One of the key differences from normal variables, or really what I should say is variables of the primitive type, is that variables that store arrays are actually objects. There's something kind of a little bit more complicated, right? Rather than just an integer by itself, a double by itself. Java needs to have an object there that can kind of manage what's going on. So that means we're actually going to end up using the new keyword. So we need to actually allocate memory and build up a list object, or I should say an array object. So what we'll type in here is int bracket list equal, and then we're going to use the keyword new, right? I'm going to build a new object. And then the new thing I'm building, well, it's going to be int brackets and close. So this is saying build me a new integer array. This isn't quite complete yet, though. What I need to put in here is how many elements I want, right? Right now, I'm not telling Java, oh, you need to have 10 slots, 100 slots, so on and so forth. I'm not saying anything so far. So what I need to do in here is type in a number that gives how many slots I want this array to have. So I'm going to actually do this in a little bit of a fancy way. I'm going to actually create a constant variable up top, and I'm going to use that to store the size of this thing. And in the textbook, I think they call the variable limit, so we'll go ahead and stick with that name. So I'm going to call this final int, and then it's going to be called limit, right? So I'm just going to have this constant variable, right, that I'm going to use that to keep track of how big I want my array to be. Rather than typing in the number over here, right, I'm going to set it off to the side. I'm going to put it in a constant variable, right? That way it's kind of well engineered. So let's say my limit initially, let me set it equal to 15. So that's the size of my array. And then over here, I'm going to put in the word limit. So the effect of this line is going to be to create a new array of integers where that array has 15 slots, right? The 15 is coming from the fact that we have a variable called limit with 15 in it, and then that's what's being passed over here, right, when we create a new array, right? So create a new int array containing 15 things. That's what we got going on so far. Let's go ahead and build this really quick. Let's make sure it's working. All right, so we have a little bit of an issue here. So our issue is over here at the bottom, non-static variable limit cannot be referenced from a static context. All right, so over here, I just forgot to put in the word static. So let me go ahead and type in over here. And now if I compile it, it'll give me no errors. It'll work properly. The complaint there, right, is that if limit isn't static, then Java doesn't know that it's okay to access it, right? Normally, if I don't have a keyword, that keyword there, then Java thinks that limit can only exist once I have an object of type BasicArray. Here, though, I'm actually creating a BasicArray object, right? I just have this kind of as my testing area. So I went ahead and told Java, oh, that variable, I meant it to be static. So yeah, I'm allowed to access it here. So now that I have my array in place, I can talk about populating it with data. Since we have this kind of multiple thing going on here, where I want the multiple to be 10 each time, I'm actually going to go ahead and create another variable. So let's go ahead and type in a new thing called multiple. So multiple will be a variable that stores the multiple of the values that I want to store, right? So here everything's going to be multiplied by 10, so I'm going to set my multiple variable equal to 10 as well. Now that I have that in place, I can go to my array and populate it with data. So let's go down here. So one thing we could maybe start thinking about doing is something like, let's go list of 0 equals 0, right? This is a very simple thing to do, right? This is saying, like, hey, go to the list variable, which is an array, go to index 0, right? That's what this little bit here is saying. Go to that first slot or first compartment in the list variable, and then store in the number 0. All right, that's what this says here. And I could even start typing this out, right? Maybe I have a list of 1 equal 10. List of 2 equal 20, and so on and so forth. I could try to do that, but that is a little bit annoying, and you may even notice I'm not using my multiple variable. Really, there should be a better way to do this, and indeed there is. So what we could do instead of this is use an array, and you'll find out that most of the time whenever you have an array, you'll have some sort of loop involved with it. So you'll want to have a loop that actually goes through and looks at each index, each compartment in that variable, and sets it equal to something, right? Then we'll have a much simpler code rather than trying to set them equal to something one by one. Let's delete out this code and try to write in something a little bit more effective. So this is what I'm going to write. I'm going to write for int I, right, the thing that's going to change as I loop, equal to 0, I less than list.length I++. And I'll talk about this in a second. So I put in my curlies there. So over here, this is kind of a standard for loop, right? For int I, this I part, you can actually think of it as standing for index, right? So that's kind of one reason you'd want to use I as a variable name, because you can read it as being an index. So initially, right, the first index we want to look at in our array, right, in our list array, is going to be index 0, right? So that's why I have I equals 0 here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through each of the indexes in that array. And here, right, this plus plus is saying increment I one at a time, right? So initially I'm going to start at 0, then I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that's a perfect match for the way elements in an array are indexed, right? So that'll let me visit each of them in turn. But at some point I need to stop. And so I need to stop when I get to the n-1 element, right? I need to stop before I go too far. Remember that arrays, right, they start with an index 0, and then if they have, say 10 elements in there, they don't actually go up to index 10, right? They only go up to index 9. It's index 0 to size of it -1. Right? Those are the indexes we want to visit. Well, let's say over here, right, this is limit equal 15, right? So we know we're going to have 15 elements in our list array variable. This part here, list.length, that's actually going to return us that 15. So this .length here, this is a bit of code that says, hey, go to the list object, right? Remember we said that list was actually an object in Java, and then we're going to do .length to represent that we're reaching inside to get some information. And this is really a variable inside that object that tells us the length, right? How many compartments are in that array. So this here will give us 15. Well, over here, what we're doing is we have this I less than length.length. So this is saying, well, I is less than 15. Well, I is less than 15, it's going to go up to the number 14, right? If it goes to number 15, this will end up being false, and the whole thing will exit out. But it'll go up to 14, right? So that's what we want, right? 14 is the index of the last slot in that array. So our loop here as a whole, right, it's going to go from 0 to 14, one at a time, which is going to have the effect of touching every single space, right, every single index in our array, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so at this point we have the number I and it's going to go, it's going to increment up by 1. It's going to go and essentially visit every single slot. So what we need to do here is actually populate in that list with actual information. So this is what I'll do. I'll type the word list, I'll have my brackets, and in the brackets, I'm going to put the letter I. So what this is saying is I want to assign something. I haven't written the right-hand side yet, but I want to assign something into list at index I, right? So this is going to go and it's going to assign into every index in that array one at a time, right? Starting at index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, and so on and so forth. All right, so we have our assignment there, but how do we calculate our multiple? Well, in this case, what we'll do is we're going to type in 10 times I, or really I wrote here I times 10. So here we're going to do is we're going to use that I variable again, right? So I was already the index into the list array, but now we're also going to say, is okay, I'm going to use that to generate my multiple, right? So I'm going to go I times 10, right? So initially, I is going to be equal to 0 in both places, and that means, hey, store into index 0. And what you're going to store is 0 times 10, which is 0, which is what we wanted up here. Let's say we go to the next iteration of the loop. Well, in that case, I is going to be equal to 1. Well, then this will say over here, list of I. Well, I will be 1. So store into list at index 1. And the value that will be stored in there is I times 10, which is going to be 1 times 10, which is going to be 10, right? So the number 10 is going to be stored into list at index 1, which is exactly what we have over here. So this code we have here is going to actually go through our array, and however big it is, right, it's going to go and it's going to populate every single space in there with the multiple of 10, right, for whatever that particular index is. So this is a much easier way to populate our array than just writing it out one at a time, right, which is what we first started off doing. Now that we have our array, though, we still want to see what's inside of it. So let's go over here and actually try printing it out. So what I'm going to use now is something from a couple of chapters ago, iterators. So the idea of an iterator is we had this special syntax that would loop over a collection, right? An object that contains a bunch of things. And that's essentially what an array is, right? An array contains a bunch of different elements. So what I'll write is this: for int number in list, print out number. So over here, right, our loop is going to look for the numbers inside of our list, right? So everything it takes out, right, is going to be stored into a variable called number. This colon here, right, just representing that this is something that I'm taking out of list, right? It's taking out of the collection, right? So it's going to take out every number from the collection, and then for each of them, we're going to do system.out.println, so that'll display our number that's stored in that particular index in that array. Let's try running this, and let's see if we get what we want, right? So hopefully we have something that looks like this. In the end, right, it'll go up to 140. Hopefully. Let's run this. Let's see what we get. All right, so things look good. So we go 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and on up until 140. So this is looking good, right? It looks like our code that creates an array, it populates it with stuff, and then prints it out. It looks like everything's working fine. Let's try changing a couple of things, though. Let's say we want to have a multiple of 5. Let's try that really quick. So multiple of 5, let's compile this, run it, see what we get. All right. So over here, I have the same output that I had before, which is because I made a slight typo over here. And maybe you guys caught this if you were watching the video. Over here, I really shouldn't have written the constant 10 here, right? Really what I want to do is have this reference the variable up top, right? I want to have this kind of this one place, right, that has all my different settings, right, for my file, and I can just change them up there. So there we go, right? Now we've corrected that. Instead of it being the hard code 10, now it's referring to the variable. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get back. All right, so now things work like we wanted them to work. So we're going 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on, right? So we're going up by increments of 5 this time. So that looks good. Now if we change the limit, right, things should work for us as well. Let me actually clear this window really quick. Let's run this. To finish up with this example, let's try modifying our array in one other way. Let's go over here and let's go list at index, 5 equal 999. So what this should do is store the number 999 into my list array at index 5, right? Meaning the 6th element in there. And if I put it here, right, what will really be happening is it should be replacing whatever was stored there by the loop, right? The loop would have put in something, right? It would have put in, for example, a number 25 there. Into whatever this position is, right? Into this index 5 in list, right? I should have put the number 25 there. Well, what this line does is it goes and replaces that. So if we compile and run this, we should see that same sequence of numbers again, right? Each of them was different by 5, but then kind of in the middle, we should see a 999 replacing that 25. And that's what we get. So this is our new output here. And over here we can see that 20, right, instead of being followed by 25, it's actually being followed by 999. Right, so that's us just doing a direct assignment into that array. Let me actually jump to the slides really quick because they have a nice picture of this overall process. On the left side, they're illustrating what it looks like when we first create the array. And here they have one that has 15 elements in it. So initially, right, everything's kind of in this blank state, right? We haven't really stored anything there. There's going to be some sort of default value, but really we need to store information into there. And that's what the loop is doing, right? So the loop was going to go and it's going to visit every element in turn, right? Every single thing that's in there. And it's going to compute whatever it should be, right? So initially it looks at index 0, puts a 0 in there, looks at index 10, puts a 10 in there, looks at index 20, puts a 20 in there, right? And it keeps on going. And eventually, right, the whole thing gets filled up, right? So we start at the top, right, and we fill in everything until we have a complete array, right, with all those values in there. Once we have all of that stuff, then we can go and then we can go and change the individual elements, right? So that's what we did. We went to index 5 and we changed it to 999. And so as you can see here, right, all those other things, those all stay the same, right? We're not changing anything else. We're only going to that specific index, index 5, and updating it to store 999. And then once we get to the third part of our program, right, where we had the display, what that's doing, right, is that's going and it's looping over each of these, right? It's going to visit each of these in turn and print them each out. That's the basic process of using an array and how we kind of populate it with values and then display it. Let's go back over to BlueJ. So this is the program we wrote a second ago, and everything so far seems to be working out pretty well. Unfortunately, there's kind of an issue that you may see when you use arrays. Let's try doing the following. Let me go in and add another assignment, right? Here I had the assignment to the index 5 because I wanted to store that 999 in there. But let's add something else. Let's say I did a list of, I don't know, let's go 15. And I also want to set that one to 999. Well, there might be an issue here, right? Because over here, when I made my array, I had it contain limit number of elements. Well, limit was set equal to 10, so all this line was creating is an array of 10 things. But if I go over here and type in 15, that's not available to me, right? My array only has 10 things in there, right? I don't have 16 slots, right? That's how many I would need to go up to 15. I don't have that much space. So this should not work. Let's try compiling it. It compiles just fine. And this is not good, right? So even though I've written code that doesn't make sense, Java's still letting me compile it. And now we can try even running this, and let's see what happens. So let's compile this, run it. We compiled it, we're running it. Error. So over here, Java lang array index out of bounds exception, 15. So what this is saying is that when Java was actually running a program, not just compiling it, but actually running it, it had this issue, right? There was an array out of bounds error, right? So over here, this 15, it was out of bounds, right? My array only exists from index 0 to index 9. Index 15 does not exist. It's out of bounds. So whenever you see that error from Java, Java is telling you that you're using some index into an array that doesn't exist, right? That array is smaller than wherever that index wants to go, right? So in this case, this index wanted to go to slot 15, but the highest I have is slot 9, right? So that wasn't valid. The tricky part here, right, is that this occurred only when we ran the program, not when we compiled it. This is problematic because you can write code, it'll compile fine, you'll think everything is working for you, and then only at some later time will you have this array out of bounds exception occur. And that's kind of an issue. Array out of bound errors are actually pretty common. Let's try it in one other way. So let me actually comment out this line here. So this was kind of an obvious thing, right? We were able to see that, oh, this number is too big. But maybe it's something a little bit more hard to see. So what if I went up to I and I went I less than or equal to list.length? So if I think about it, this is going to let I go all the way up to 10, right? Before it was only going up to 9, right? Because we had here, right, limit was equal to 10. That meant that this was 10, and then over here I would have to be less than that, so that still would go up to 9. But if we change this over here and go less than or equal to, this loop will actually let I go up to 10. Let's try compiling this. Of course it works, and then we try running it. Error, right? Array out of bounds exception. So this is kind of a hard to see bug, right? Here, right, we picked the bad bound for our array, right? Before our array was properly written, it went from 0 to 9. But if we had this kind of, maybe we were coding things a little bit differently, we just made a mistake or a typo. Well, in that case, right, we might have I going from 0 to 10. Well, those first values, right, from 0 to 9, those are fine, right? We're able to compute that and assign into them. But once we hit that 10, right, because we're allowing it to be less than or equal to, and I becomes 10, well, then that next line where we go list of I, that will try to go into the element at index 10 in that list, which doesn't exist, which will give us an error. So in general, right, when you're using loops are very handy for accessing things in arrays, but you need to be careful that you don't go out of bounds, right? You don't try to access an index that isn't actually there. One thing that generally helps us with that is this .length variable. So let me undo my error. I noticed, right, that instead of having to keep track of how big that list was, having to use the word limit again here, instead there's this built-in member variable, right, inside the list object that'll keep track of how many elements are inside of it, right? So this is kind of our way, right, that we can make sure that we're not going out of bounds, because we can always go in there. Maybe we have an if statement or something, and we can check to see how long it is and whether a particular index, right, is actually valid, right, whether it's in the bounds of that list or not. Remember again that the bounds of an array are from index 0 to index n-1, right, where n is the size of that array.